Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on Espatools and their role to support countries. My name is Veronika Wozak. I work for the Social Protection Department. And we've organized, and I also, as part of my work for the ILO Social Protection Department, I work on the ISPA coordination team that is led by the World Bank, jointly by the World Bank and the ILO. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah, we are hosting this webinar, or we use the service of the socialprotection.org, who is hosting this webinar for us, and thank you very much for your support in organizing this. And yeah, can you go to the next slide? This is just a little bit of information on myself. Since you registered for this webinar, I'm assuming that you already know a little bit about Espatools, Interagency Social Protection Assessment Tools. The focus for this session is really a general introduction on the tools, and the focus is on how to apply the tools and their implementation process. This is very generic. I try to be brief, and I would like to have a very long question and answer session so that all of you get a chance to ask whatever question you may have. So maybe I can then go into more detail depending on your particular interest or concerns. During the question and answer session, we also have Luz Rodriguez from the World Bank, who's co-leading the ISPA coordination team together with me, and she will also come in and provide her insights and expertise on Espatools during the question and answer session. Although most of you may already know a little bit about Espatools, I'll start with an explanation of what the tools actually are. Can we go to the next slide, please? So Espatools are a set of tools. Currently, there's 4 tools that are already finalized, but in the end, we aim to produce a whole suite of tools addressing different aspects of social protection. They aim to analyze the performance of social protection systems or programs or delivery mechanisms. So identify strengths and weaknesses and come up with suggestions of how they can be improved. Can we go to the next slide, please? The next slide gives an overview of the suite of tools that we aim to develop eventually. So under the system tools, what we already have available is a tool that looks at, it's called Core Diagnostic Instrument, and it looks at the entire social protection system. And we're currently developing, this is the red circle, a tool on assessing social protection policy options. And this is very much focused on the policy dialogue process of, based on evidence, deciding between different policy options. In the program suite, and this is looking into assessing different contingencies or risks or program types. The only tool that's ready in this suite for now is the Social Protection Public Works Programs tool that is also the tool that so far has the most applications and obviously is made to assess public works programs that have a social protection objective. And there's currently work underway on a tool to assess food security and nutrition. Under the delivery or implementation aspects, there the tools aim to look at different really detailed assessments of the various activities that need to be implemented to run a social protection program. Currently available are a tool looking into social identification for social protection programs and a tool that focuses on social protection payments. So those programs that deliver cash or near cash benefits, how they can best pay out the benefits. So these are the tools that are currently available, and future ones will be developed so that eventually really the whole universe of the social protection system can be assessed through using different ISPA tools. Can we go through to the next slide, please? So what is a tool, or what does each tool include? In general, there are 4 main components. The first one is what we call What Matters guidance note. This is basically a manual or an explanation of the conceptual framework, the key issues to be addressed in the context of the tool, and also providing information on how the tool is organized and the assessment should be carried out. Secondly, a key part of the tool is the questionnaire, and the logic of the questionnaire is also explained in the What Matters guidance note. So the questionnaire is really a framework that allows a systematic collection of the qualitative and quantitative data that is needed to assess the performance. And then the third element of each tool is an assessment matrix that, first of all, for that matrix, a set of agreed criteria are agreed against which the assessment, the program or delivery mechanism or system will be assessed. And this basically gives an overview of the performance based on the information collected through the questionnaire. And this is a key aspect of how the tool is implemented to translate the data collected into this assessment matrix, giving an overview of the performance. And then finally, there is the country report outline, which, depending on the content of each tool, proposes a structure of how to organize the more elaborated assessment report. And then for all the tools, there is a generic implementation guideline that goes into further detail of the process of how the tools should be applied. And my current presentation is very much focused on or based on these implementation guidelines. Can we go to the next slide, please? Why are ISPA tools used, or why are they useful? What's the value added? One strength of the tools is that all of them come from a systems approach. So even the program and delivery mechanism tools, although they focus obviously on program performance or on the delivery aspect, they still look a little bit into the whole universe and context, and to the extent that this is relevant, they place the particular program or delivery mechanism into the overall context of the social protection system, where does it fit in, and related policy areas. And this is really important because one of the key objectives of the ISPA tools is to improve coordination and ensuring the building of coherent social protection systems that fit into the overall national development framework or policy framework. And so it's important to look into, even for program or delivery tools, to look into the broader context of general social protection system and related policy areas. Secondly, obviously the focus on diagnostic or looking into strengths and weaknesses means that based on the data collected, there will be a strong evidence base available to draw on, so that policy decisions can be informed by technically sound results of this diagnostic. And And thirdly, as I said before, a key focus is improved coherence, and this requires coordination. And in terms of the implementation process, strong emphasis is placed on coordination across different sectors and making all relevant partners work together. And through these three aspects, obviously the overall objective is to extend social protection and ensure more people have better access to social protection based on their needs. Can we go to the next slide? Who uses ISPA tools? Well, in the most general sense, everybody can use them. They're available online and for free and open access. We can't and we don't want to control who uses them and how. But obviously we develop them with a target audience in mind, and these are social protection experts from government institutions, from international development agencies, but also from academic research institutions or for consultants working in development. A key point to keep in mind here is that they're really developed as experts tools. It will most likely be difficult for a layperson to come to a tool and use it meaningfully. I mean, if you look at the questionnaire, I mean, there is still a lot of background knowledge needed to be able to navigate through it, and I mean, I think the greatest challenge is often how to strike a good balance on how much time to spend on looking for data and how to fill data gaps, and this requires really a lot of expertise. And also in terms of then carrying out the diagnostic and translating information collected into the assessment matrix, again, I think this is really for a job for social protection specialists to engage in. Then at the micro level, who uses ISPA tools? Usually for each tool application there is an assessment team that is being composed and that is leading the work on carrying out the diagnostic. As a minimum, depending on the tool and the complexity of the task, 2 to 4 experts would work on the assessment, but of course with inputs from all relevant stakeholders. Can we go to the next slide? When to use ISPA tools? Basically, there's in the whole implementation process, at every step of engaging and implementing social protection programs or systems, their administration or monitoring, the design, the evaluation, the analysis, reforms or policy decisions, it can be useful to carry out an ISPA, a diagnostic using an ISPA tool. And for international agencies, of course, this they can use ISPA tools whenever they receive a government request for analytical work on social protection, such as sector reviews, program evaluations, support for reforms, etc. Can we go to the next slide? So where to use ISPA tools? ISPA tools are flexible. They can be applied in any country. The map below shows the applications that have already taken place or are ongoing or planned. And you can see this is really more or less across the globe. An important thing to keep in mind here is that one step of the implementation process entails tailoring the tool to the country context and in particular the questionnaire. But the questionnaire, the assessment criteria and the matrix are adaptable to all country contexts. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, this slide provides an overview of the ISPA tool application process from the request for an assessment and the preparatory phase to the formation of the assessment team and the launching workshop, the data collection, the carrying out of the assessment itself, and finally producing the country report. And I would like to go into each of these steps in detail, but before that mention a few key points that one should keep in mind for any tool application. Can we go to the next slide, please? And I mean, since I'm talking about this now in general for all the ISPA tools, these are very generic points. They're the same as for any project implementation. ISPA tools should ensure country ownership, and as I said before, tailoring the tool to the country context and the specific question or need that a government or country has and that should be addressed. Then through a stakeholder analysis, it's important to identify the right entry points and the correct lead agency. This is important, especially with the view to really ensuring to have policy impact and the results translate into action for really improving the social protection system. Then another key issue is broad stakeholder participation. This is often a challenge because of the multi-sectoral nature of social protection, and typically countries have social protection interventions spread under the responsibility of various line ministries, and it's important to really make sure everybody is involved. And again, depending on the tool that we're looking at, there will be also very specific additional stakeholders that one may not initially think of as key in social protection. But for example, to assess the payment delivery landscape, even from the private sector, the banking sector, or mobile phone sector, there may be important stakeholders to bring on board and benefit from their expertise to really carry out a good diagnostic of the payment environment. Related to this is the point about interagency cooperation. The participation also includes international agencies potentially, to the extent that they are invited to the process, and to the extent that the tool is implemented by an international agency, there is a commitment to invite all other development partners to the process and participate if they're interested. Then another key point, if this is needed, training should be organized to ensure that everybody involved in the process is capable, it has the capacity and understands what the tool is about, how it's used, and also, I mean, especially for the participatory aspect, it's important that also a basic understanding of social protection is ensured by everyone who's involved. Another key point, I mean, this goes without saying in a way, that a careful planning is needed, but we've seen oftentimes that it's easy to underestimate the amount of time and resources required, including human resources, while at the same time allowing for a certain degree of flexibility and be able to respond to developments as you go along. And then finally, ideally, these tools should be applied periodically, which would allow to track progress and trends. And I mean, the tools are not made for cross-country comparison, but within each country it can be interesting to, through a periodic application, see the difference between the first, second, and third application, and how hopefully the system or program has improved or not. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so going through each of these steps in a little bit more detail. During the preparatory phase, it's important to clearly state the objectives and gain an understanding of what questions or problems the diagnostic is supposed to address. It's equally important to manage expectations. I mean, the tools are trying to be comprehensive, but of course there's only so much they can do, and a lot of the limitations is related to data limitations. The tools are not set up to generate primary data on, for example, beneficiary coverage. If programs don't keep sound administrative records of who their members are, that's something that the tools won't be able to solve, for example. Based on having clarity on the objectives and expectations, then agree on the scope of the assessment. This is also a key issue that is often a challenge, especially for systems assessment, which activities or programs are considered social protection or not. Espatools have an agreed generic definition of social protection, which may not always coincide perfectly with what the country or the social protection, national social protection strategy defines as social protection. And then finally, as I said before, needing to tailor the tool a little bit to the country context. Can we go to the next slide? Then the real start of the assessment is the setting up of the assessment team that will then carry out a stakeholder analysis to ensure that all the relevant actors are involved and included in the process. And then a key aspect is also that as soon as the assessment team is set up, they should start the desk review and go through the tool, tailor the questionnaire to the context, and then start the pre-population of the questionnaire. This is really important because the more work is carried out prior to the stakeholder engagement, then the more in-depth information one is able to retrieve, and the more the richer the analysis will ultimately be. And can we go to the next slide? Then for the actual launch of the assessment, what is usually done is to organize a multi-stakeholder workshop that will again present the objectives and the agreed scope, and if needed, based on the discussions during the workshop, there should be enough flexibility to still slightly adjust what was previously agreed in terms of objectives and process. The inception workshop should also make very clear the steps of carrying out the diagnostic and the implementation arrangements. And most importantly, discuss the data requirements and alert participants to the fact what is expected from them in terms of contributing data and information. And then, since not everybody may be able to participate in this workshop, it's important to make the information of the workshop available to all relevant stakeholders. Can we go to the next, please? Now, the key or core point of the whole exercise, arguably, is the data collection. Prior to going into the bilateral consultations and interviews, the desk review should be finalized. And then the questionnaire should be organized in a way that for each interview or for each bilateral consultation or expert interview, only the relevant parts of the questionnaire are submitted or discussed. Within each institution, it may be important to talk to various persons from different departments and ask the same questions to different people to see if there is different views and perceptions on certain issues. It's also very important to organize for site visits and focus group discussions of, for example, persons concerned, of beneficiaries, to really get an impression of how the whole system or program works out in practice. Can we go to the next slide, please? Then for the assessment, the data obviously needs to be consolidated, and data contradictions need to be identified, discussed, and explicitly addressed how they are supposed to be dealt with. Very often this is done through a second workshop where the preliminary information is presented and validated. Then, based on this information and the data collected, the assessment matrix will be filled, and this can be done through various or through different ways. One way of filling the assessment matrix is that the assessment team simply does this. Another more participatory way of doing this is to organize a stakeholder workshop and then jointly have, for example, working groups that would jointly fill in the assessment matrix. And then as a final part, there's the first version of the country report that is drafted and then circulated for comments. And this leads to the next step and slide, finalization of the report, which is can we go through to the next slide? So there is a presentation and discussion of the findings, and based on feedback received on this, the report should be revised and finalized, and then disseminated. Can we go to the next slide? So what is needed for a tool application? This is very difficult to say because it depends a lot on the scope of the exercise, but also the country context, the complexity of the social protection system or program, the geographic heterogeneity, the different administrative levels, etc., and most importantly the data that is already readily available, or how easily it can be collected. So depending on that, an assessment can take between 3 to 15 months, and probably a minimum of $25,000 would be needed. But as I said, this is extremely difficult to estimate, and it can vary tremendously depending on the context of the application. And also the objective to a certain extent. I mean, in theory, it's possible. I've now discussed a little bit the ideal case application of an Espa tool. At a minimal, it can even be useful to look at the Espa tool to only do a desk review for a very quick diagnostic, because each tool presents a very systematic framework for analyzing whatever it's set out to do. But in terms of where ISPA tools are employed to really provide inputs for a policy reform or a policy decision making, then this would really be the ideal type application that I've just sketched out. Okay, so I said I wanted to be quick with my presentation. I wasn't super quick, but still we have half an hour for discussion. So before I wrap up, just to encourage you to participate by either sending in your questions in written form, or since there aren't an overwhelming number of participants, I think there's also a possibility, if you would like to raise your questions verbally, that you can participate in the discussion and talk, if you would like to. So as for next steps, even after this webinar, if in general, I mean, if as part of your work you're interested in using any of the Espa tools, you can always contact the coordination team. If you want to learn more about Espa, we will have further e-learnings. We have further webinars that will focus on specific tools that we will organize in the course of the year. We also have online e-learning modules that you can go through yourself just to get a more in-depth impression of different tools. As I said, we're constantly developing, we're still in the process of developing additional tools, so if you have expertise that any of the tools in particular could benefit from, that would also be, we would also be interested in you possibly joining any of the working groups that are working on developing tools. Okay, so can we go to the next slide? This was pretty much it from my side. So I will just need to quickly take a look at the questions. Or Luz, since you already seem to have had a look at them, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Good morning, everyone. I have a couple of questions here that we have received from the audience. Can a country apply any of the tools independently?
And I reply immediately, or do you want to read out a few questions?
Yes, please. I think that it's...
we go one by one, right? So, yes, of course. I mean, to the extent that sufficient expertise of social protection specialists is available in the country, the tools are online, available for download, and they are there, ready to be used. We are always very interested to learn about country applications. The tools are supposed to be living documents that we want to constantly improve as we gain further country application experience. So we highly appreciate if you inform us about your intention to apply them, and we are also happy to answer any questions that you may have as you go along. But yes, countries can, and I mean, it would be a great success, I think, for the tools if governments just decide to use them, and if they find them helpful or worthwhile. That means that we've done a good job in developing them for us.
Okay, great. We have another question here from Pamela. She says, I have two questions. One, finalizing this review before the final stage. Report writing may be premature because you may want or need to go back to seeking certain data. It should be iterative. Second, identifying the right persons should, in my view, be complicated. Sometimes you cannot know ex ante who may have insightful knowledge or views, so I would suggest rather maintaining a broad scope allowing to cover many of the questions.
Sorry, I didn't quite understand that. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, she has two comments or questions. Yeah.
The second one I didn't quite get.
Okay, the second one is identifying the right persons should be complicated. Sometimes you cannot know ex ante who may have insightful knowledge or views, so I would suggest rather maintaining a broad scope allowing to cover many of the questions, allowing for inductive data collection. What are your views on that?
Okay, finalize the desk review. I mean, of course, for the data collection, the objective when starting the bilateral consultations, interviews, focus group discussions, etc., is to fill in the gaps that are still missing and validate what has been entered in the desk review. But I mean, when I say finalize desk review, what I mean is that what is available online from readily available government sources, previous evaluations, studies, academic research, etc. Ideally, I mean, whatever can be obtained without direct interaction with the relevant stakeholders, this should be done prior to the, let's say, field data collection. But the idea, of course, is that even the field data collection or interviews, etc., would be used to also complete the questionnaire. I'm not sure whether this is clear, but it's a little bit of an artificial separation maybe, but for me the desk review is really what you can do without even being in the country. And then in the second step is whatever you do, really going out of your office and talking to people and seeing for yourself. I don't know, Luz, if you want to add to this?
No, I think that is sufficient. We have a...
And then, sorry, the second question on who is... it's difficult, obviously, to identify the right people within each organization, and I mean, obviously, it's important to remain open and I mean use the snowball system, asking each person you talk to whether they think there's other important persons that should also be talked to. In terms of doing this inductively, I'm not entirely sure whether I understand what you mean by this. I do think that, I mean, if you look at the questionnaires, they are, I mean, the biggest one for the system assessment has something like 600 questions, and it's really important to select those that you want information on for each different activity, or for each different interview, or for each focus group discussion. Otherwise, the interview loses focus. That doesn't mean that when talking to the person you realize they have expertise in a different area that you expected. I mean, you need to be flexible enough to also then rather gain, try to dig deeper into what that person knows, rather than trying to get your prepared interview questions that the person then turns out not to be expert on. But so yes, I mean, of course you need to be open and flexible, but still I think it is important to have a clear objective of what to find out from whom, so that you don't get lost in I mean, if you carry the whole questionnaire to each interview, I mean, there's no chance to get through.
Correct. I would just add that it's very important to know very well the questionnaire in advance to have your interviews on your it's more like informational interviews, because this is not like a survey or like a very structured uh, conversation, right? It's more like an open conversation. So if you really know the questionnaire, and if you really know the person, the role of the person that you are interviewing, you will make the best use of the tool. The idea is that the ISPA tools are pretty flexible, and also sometimes people get discouraged because they see like very long questionnaires, but at the end you just have to think that this is like a framework for your assessment or for your diagnostic. So don't feel that it's like constraining you. It's more like it's helping you to guide your discussion with your with the different stakeholders. That will be my advice. We have more questions from the audience, Veronica. We got a question from Paul Mondoa. Are the ISPA tools monitoring tools or impact assessment tools? I think that's a great question.
Yeah. They are more monitoring tools. I mean, they're certainly not impact assessment tools. I mean, part of it looks into impact also, to the extent that, for example, for the system assessment, if there are any impact assessment evaluations already available for different programs, this information would be drawn on. But but they're more intended as monitoring tools, and actually this is what happened in our CODI application in Vietnam. The government then decided that they wanted to build a monitoring and evaluation framework for their national social protection system. Of course, I mean, based on the framework that is provided by CODI. This, I mean, of course, they would adapt it and tailor it to their preferences, but they had stated the intention of using this as and this is what I also meant by saying this should be periodically applied to monitor the performance. So the focus is not impact assessment.
Correct. I would say that, yeah.
And having said that, it looks at, I mean, the tools are very comprehensive. They look really at the processes, at the policy framework, the financing framework, administrative framework, delivery framework. They also look into M&E, existing M&E structures set up. So they really look at the whole breadth of what is needed to make a program or system up and running.
Very good. Yeah, I would say that I just will complement that these are tools that could be used in different times of a program. When you are designing a program, when you are like in the mid phase of implementing a program, or at the end. So as Veronica said, they really help to monitor the progress of your system or your program or your delivery system, and they are meant to be applied like rapidly, so they do not replace impact evaluations or more comprehensive studies. So exactly, in-depth analysis. Very good.
I mean, can I just say one more thing? I mean, even monitoring tool, I think diagnostic tool really best describes it, because monitoring sounds like there's something already in place that you want to monitor, but to a certain extent the idea is to look at a given situation, and then you can, based on this diagnose, even start a program or reform an existing one. Sorry.
Correct.
Next
Correct.
question.
Yeah, next question. Are there from Heiner Salomon? Are there plans to translate the ISPA tools into other languages?
That's also a very good question. Actually, several ones are already translated. So we have the CODI and the Public Works, and no, I think only those two are available in Arabic, French, and Spanish. Correct me if I'm wrong. Luz, I think you know this better.
You're right. Yeah, you're right. And we also have the payments tool recently translated into French.
Yeah, okay. And I mean, this is actually a really good question. If you want to apply a tool in a country and you would need a different language version, please contact us, and then we can look into if we can support any translation work that's needed. Because, I mean, obviously we're interested in having Espatools applications, and if there's the concrete country request or need, because for us sometimes it's difficult to prioritize which translation we tackle next. It may be worth from your side to contact us, and then we can see if we can help out. I mean, we can't, it depends on resources available. We can't promise to always do any translation that you ask for, but you can always definitely contact us and see if there is a possibility.
Correct. Another question from Paul. What is the output from the assessment matrix? Talking about the report, is it a quantitative or a qualitative report? Qualitative report. I'm sorry.
That's a very good question, and in each of the working groups for each tool, this was the most contested issue discussed. The report is definitely a narrative report that combines quantitative and qualitative aspects, but I would say it's more focused on qualitative. The assessment matrix, to a certain extent, can be quantified. That, I mean, a lot of the matrices of the tools, and I mean, this is not the same for each tool, but usually they ask a question, and then they ask you to rate it on a 4-point scale, from latent, emergent, or 1 to 4, very poor, poor, good, very good performance. But in order to avoid that the assessment team or the stakeholders just tick boxes, what we try to do is that we ask for the rating, and then we encourage them to justify why they think this is a 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. And also, I mean, the challenge with these ratings is that very often everything ends up being either a 2 or 3, right? I mean, you have very few ratings saying this is really very poor, or you have very few saying this is very good. They end up all being more or less in the middle. So you don't get the tremendously interesting findings if you only look at the score per se. Also, we have not yet worked on any sophisticated methodology for then kind of combining scores into any form of index or weighing them. I mean, you just have kind of the different criteria, and sometimes then sub-aspects for each criteria and the assessment. But I mean, there's no formula to aggregate this into a real quantitative, sophisticated assessment methodology. So, I mean, often what we use, or some of the tools, what they use is color coding. You have more like a red, an orange, a yellow, and a green. I mean, it's just to give an idea that immediately strikes you if something works very bad or really well. What we found throughout the process is what is more interesting is to witness the discussions during the workshops between different stakeholders when they try to argue why something should be a 3 rather than a 2, and this is the most interesting information that you get to see if different stakeholders would score differently and how they justify why they think scores should be different. which again scores even, turns even the more quantitative aspect of the exercise into also a qualitative observation, if you want. But Luz, I think maybe it's interesting to hear a different perspective on this, because this was so much discussed during the working groups. Do you want to also?
And yeah, I think that what you said is right. The most important thing is not necessarily the scoring, but the discussion, and also the self-assessment that the assessment matrix is encouraging for government agencies. Typically, agencies get really apprehensive when it comes to assess whatever they have done in their projects, and they get initially a little bit reluctant of using the tool. But then they realize that what is doing is helping them to provide them a framework of analysis, and also to reflect of what things could be improved in the delivery or the design of their programs and services. So definitely the assessment is more an instrument that like an end. The important thing is the discussion, and the important thing are the policy options that come after conducting the assessment. Okay, I have another question. We have 7 minutes left, and we have more questions from the audience. I think that this is a very interesting question from Simon Anderson. Has there been any use of ISPA tools to assess social protection systems from the perspective of linking to climate adaptation support by governments? The link between social protection and climate adaptation.
I don't think so, not that I'm aware of.
No, so far we don't have any particular tools on social protection adaptive interventions. However, I can say that CODI has a number of questions that are exploring how the social protection system is prepared to adapt in the case, I mean, when it's facing some changes because of natural disasters or other crises. So definitely CODI offers some elements that could be used for social protection, for adaptive social protection. However, down the road, some agencies have proposed to work on a specific tool for that, but we don't have it at this very. I mean, we don't have it yet. So, but maybe if I don't know, Simon, if you work for an agency, but if you do, and this is something that interests you, please contact us, and maybe we can start thinking on that, because this is definitely an area that is very very hot at this moment on social protection. More questions from Simon. Does ILO country staff provide support to the application of the ISPA tools?
It's not just ILO country staff. It's in general. The objective is that ISPA tools are developed by more than 20 agencies, and a lot of them are UN agencies, and all the key players, if I may say so, in social protection are there. So I mean, the World Bank, ILO, UNICEF, FAO, but also the bilateral ones: Germany, France, Finland. I mean, I shouldn't name anyone, because obviously when you start naming, you forget important ones, and then I don't want to upset anyone. But so, and for the time being, the tools are not fully mainstreamed in all of the organizations yet. So depending on which country you're in, you may contact the staff, and that staff person may not be aware of ISPA tools yet. But I mean, the safer address for the time being, I think, would still be more the headquarters staff than the country staff, most likely. But of course, for example, those countries where tools have already been applied, there's obviously staff would already be very well aware of them. And in principle, all these agencies are committed to using Espatools and to supporting Espatool applications. So, I mean, if you have a particular country in mind, I mean, the safest thing to do is just contact us or the country office, or the, I mean, the ILO case, it would often be the regional or regional office. We don't have country offices in all the countries, and see. But in principle, yes, there is a commitment to support Espatool applications, and this is still centralized, but there's also an Espatool help desk, which is run by basically Luz and me, the coordination team. So this is set up particular for this purpose of supporting Espatool applications. So anyone who wants to or is in the process of using an Espatool and has any question along the process, they can contact the help desk, and we will either try to assist ourselves, or if it is beyond our technical capacity to do so, we will try to find a relevant expert to link up to and assist with whatever question is asked.
Very good. We have another question from Belarus. Does any of Espatools embrace cost-benefit analysis methodology?
This is often a criteria, cost efficiency, cost effectiveness, implying cost-benefit analysis. However, usually this is meant to draw on existing cost-benefit studies. This is a cost-benefit study is considered too complex to be carried out as part of an Espatool application. So rather, the idea would be during the Espatool application, look for existing studies that have been carried out in the past. But it is definitely a key criteria for the diagnostic or for the assessment.
And maybe to close our webinar, we have one question from...
If we have additional questions, I understand that we can go over time a little bit. So, I mean, if participants are interested to stay on, we can do another 10 to 15 minutes if there are still interesting questions that we have not yet addressed.
Okay, so sounds good.
Depending on people's time and willingness, I'm happy to continue as long as we have interesting questions coming in.
Yeah, we still have a few to answer, so let's continue.
So let's continue.
We have Maja is asking how gender is considered and included in these tools. If not in any systematic and comprehensive way, what can be done to address the gaps?
Again, it's difficult to give a general answer across all the tools because they're each designed differently in terms of the questionnaire, the assessment criteria, and the details. Wherever quantitative data is considered, obviously, this is requested to be collected, disaggregated by standard socio-demographic characteristics, including, of course, gender. I think, for example, the food security and nutrition tool has one explicit indicator on gender sensitive approaches and specific concern for food security and nutrition outcomes, specifically for women and girls. And I mean, a lot of it is not an explicit separate gender indicator, but a lot of it is included. For example, a lot of the tools have specific sections with this for focusing on the poor and vulnerable, and there women are considered amongst the group of poor and vulnerable. But I think it would be really, from my point of view, it would be really important to further strengthen the gender lens throughout the different tools, and this could be a key concern. As I said, these are meant to be living documents, and it would be great if this could be more consistently ensured throughout the tools in the next, as they are revised. And I think probably basing this on country experience and how gender aspects has then in practice been included in this in the country applications can actually be the best way to do this, because then it's ensured that it's practical. And also, if the person who asked the question has any specific clear ideas of how this can best be done, it would be very interesting to get inputs in this regard.
Excellent.
I don't know if you have any additional.
I think that some of the tools already have like some criteria that are including the gender lens, but definitely there are not enough mechanisms to mainstream gender considerations. So yeah, an invitation to Maya and to other social protection practitioners with experience in the field to send us their ideas and to provide us with the mechanisms that we can use to strengthen the gender perspective in the tools. We have another question from David. How can we access the reports generated from some of the countries which have used these tools?
That's a very good question. We aim to publish the country reports also on the website, Espatools.org. However, this depends on getting the agreement of the government to make them publicly available, and sometimes for one reason or another countries decide to keep them confidential rather than making them publicly available. I'm not sure, Luz, do we already have any of the country reports published on the website?
I think that the payments report for Tanzania is already included in the website. They have been very generous and they have allowed us to share it with the public. So if you guys are interested, in case that is not, check out the website, Espatools.org, and if not, please contact us directly and we can share the report with you. Every report, the structure is very similar, but of course the content varies according to the country, to the availability of information, to the scope of the assessment. But even if if payments is not the tool that you want to apply, it will give you a good idea of what entails a country report for ISPA and the sort of recommendations that they provide. So we are happy to share it with you, and hopefully down the road when we have more applications we can share additional reports. But again, as Veronica said, it will depend on the willingness and the agreement of the government authorities. We have another question from Ulatsimir, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Do you provide technical assistance or capacity development exercises in applying ISPA tools?
Technical assistance in applying ISPA tools, that again depends on the context of the request. as the ISPA tool initiative doesn't have any resources to support the application, financial resources. We can contribute our technical expertise, but we don't have financial resources. Very often the best strategy for that is to seek partnership with other development agencies, bilateral, multilateral, and include this as part of an activity of any social protection project or program that you're developing in your country. We can also try and support seeking for fund or fundraising for ISPA tool application. In terms of capacity development, I mentioned during my presentation that we have guided online courses for various tools, not for all of them yet, and currently only in English. But again, you can look at the online modules we've put. We organize these kind of webinars that we have now, and and we will do them also we will also do tool-specific webinars. And so far we have also carried out one face-to-face training. For the time being, this was organized for the African region. Depending on availability of funds, in the future we would plan to do one for Asia also. So yes, I mean we are working on capacity development, and we also make available usually the materials that we use for capacity development. So we have the training materials that we use at the face-to-face trainings. In the future, we also plan to develop more detailed manuals or instruction manuals for how to use each tool, but again, this is more planned for the future, and this is not yet available.
Yes, and I will encourage the audience, if you work with an international agency, or if you work with a government or with any organization interested in developing these assessments, and you are interested in having like a in-country training on ISPA, please contact us, and we maybe can explore if we can do something together, in the sense that we can try to mobilize our regional teams, or do some virtual training. I mean, there are many ways that we can contribute to your training events. If you have, if you are planning training events for your staff or your social protection practitioners, contact us, and we can try to identify if we could participate and provide training, either rapid training or more in-depth training on the different tools that we have so far. We are interested in doing this joint process of training, and also, and yeah.
And the advantage there would also be that we can organize for a tailor-made training, so it would be specifically tailored to the country and to the objectives and needs in that case.
Correct. We have a question from Diolinda, and I think that this is a good one. What are your thoughts on applying just a portion of any given tool as pertains to your specific needs or project?
That depends on the tool. Again, it's a bit difficult to answer this generically. For the system assessment tool, this is quite a natural question to a certain extent. As I explained, it's really looking at the entire system. And even if you look at the entire system, you may have one very specific motivation for carrying out the system assessment. Be this a concern for social protection financing, or the administrative setup or the policy and legal framework. And there I think I said one of the first steps in the implementation process is go through the questionnaire and tailor the questionnaire to the needs. And this can include eliminating a large part of the more detailed question on certain modules and expanding on those areas where the focus of the diagnostic is. I'm more doubtful that having a modular approach or only using part of it would make sense for the other tools. I think for the program and even more importantly for the delivery tools, I doubt it will make sense to only use part of the questionnaire. I think these really limit the questionnaire to the key questions that need to be asked to have a meaningful diagnostic of, for example, the payment environment or the payment system or the identification system. I don't see how you can only use part of that questionnaire.
Yeah, I agree with you. There are, for example, in the public works tool, that it has a number of modules, and also that vary depending on the specific public works program that country is developing. There are some questions that are not meant to be used. So, but my suggestion is to go and have a careful look at the tools and identify which questions will be relevant for your context and which ones are not. These are meant to be flexibly applied. So that will be my answer.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. A lot of the tools are already built that way. For example, they provide questions relevant for the contributory schemes that you can jump immediately if you look at a non-contributory, and vice versa. Or what Luz just mentioned, there are separate modules for the different types of public works interventions. So, for example, you have a module on if the public works program is building infrastructure and roads, then you ask that block of questions. If it looks at climate change and rehabilitation, you look at that block of questions. Which reminds me, actually, the public works tool has a part on climate change, I think. Coming back to the previous question on climate change. So some of the tools already have this in mind, that not all questions need to be asked at all times depending on what you're actually looking at.
Correct. And another question from Paul. Can you please give details on e-learning and how one can join the expert group or the expert groups?
I guess I can send the link to the online
e-learning modules.
E-learning modules to everybody who joined the discussion. And for the expert groups, it's best to just contact either Luz or myself. Did we include any email address on the PowerPoint presentation? Let me check.
I think we did not, but perhaps our friends from socialprotection.org can share it with the list of attendees and share our emails.
Yeah, or I can also put that in the chat if you're interested.
Correct, yeah. We have another question here from Simon. And he says Portuguese translated Espatools documentation would be very useful. We are intending to use the tools in Mozambique. And that's great news. And yeah, we have already have some complaints from our Portuguese speaking friends. So we will make our best to start moving towards the translation of some of the tools to Portuguese.
Okay. I've just sent the link to the training modules that we have available online. Also, I've learned from socialprotection.org that all the webinars that they carry out are recorded and available online through, I think they uploaded to YouTube, and then you get a link on the website where you can access the YouTube video. And in autumn 2016, so late last year, we had a series of webinars on the implementation of the payments tool. So in case you're interested in payments tool, there are 3 webinars available online on socialprotection.org that you can watch to learn more about the payments tool, in addition to the online courses that I just sent the link to. And then should I send our email addresses, Luz, and mine, for in case you want to get involved in any of the expert groups in developing a tool, then you can contact either Luz or myself.
Yes, I will encourage you to ask all your questions. Don't be shy. Please send us all your emails. And if you are interested in applying the tools in your countries, please contact us. If we cannot help, probably someone in our organizations and our agencies can. We are more than 20 development partners working together, so we will do our best to mobilize some of our resources, I mean at least our human resources, to support part of the process that you are doing in your specific countries. Veronica, it's 5:18 in Washington, D.C. I don't know what time is in Geneva. It's 10:18, I believe.
Yeah, 11.
11:18, right.
Yeah.
So I don't see we have more questions coming. So if you are okay with this, we think that we can just thank our audience.
Thanks again, everybody, for listening in and participating. And as Luz already said, don't be shy. Contact us with any other questions or suggestions or inputs you may have, and we look forward to hearing from you.
And thank you to our colleagues in socialprotection.org.
Yes, thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye.